Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Lancaster Safety's Webinar Wednesdays. Lancaster Safety is an award-winning, nationwide OSHA compliance firm. We hold these free safety webinars on a monthly basis to help spread the word about the importance of safety. My name is Crystal, and today we are going to cover how to detect health hazards in the workplace. Today, I am joined by one of our trainers in the Dallas area, Sherry Wilson. Sherry was the first female firefighter paramedic by the Dallas Fire Rescue Department in 1977. She also specializes in emergency healthcare and OSHA training, emergency equipment and services such as inspections, consulting, and other life-saving equipment such as AEDs. In addition to being an on-site safety and healthcare trainer, she also conducts seminars, webinars, and motivational speaking engagements. Sherry, thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
So today's agenda, we are going to talk about 6 types of health hazards, techniques to recognize health hazards, tools and methods for evaluation, measures to control exposure, and OSHA resources available to you. So with that being said, Sherry, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, when I first started, there was only 4 health hazards. The first 4, I think, we've now added ergonomic and work organizational and psychological hazards to the list. So let's start with the safety hazards. Everybody knows about slip, trips, falls, spills on the floor, and tripping hazards. One of the things that I find that a lot of my clients don't realize is that blocked aisles and unmarked pathways. So if you have a warehouse where you have supplies being stored on a shelf, there needs to also be, especially if you have any equipment sticking out of the shelf, there needs to be markings. There needs to be a markings for the walkways, and there needs to be markings for the areas in which forklifts drive through. And if you have any kind of let's say stainless steel coming up out of a shelf, I come walk around the corner and I run into that equipment or that piece of product, whether it be at my shin or ankle or foot or knee or wherever, I could be injured. And so a lot of people fail to think about those things. And those are the kind of things that we recognize when Lancaster goes out and we do an inspection or we do training, is that we share these ideas with people. Cords running across the floor, and then, of course, working from heights on ladders, scaffolds, fall protection. You know, are your employees wearing fall protection? If you're in general industry, if they go above 4 feet, they have to have fall protection. If they're in the construction industry and they go above 6 feet, they have to have fall protection. If they go above 10 feet on a scaffold, they have to have fall protection. So anytime your employees are working in a raised area, we've got to think about it and we've got to be safe and we've got to be paying attention to what we're doing. So another one is machinery, the safety hazards. Um, of course, one of the number one things that I see that employees do is they will remove the guards and or they will fail to use safety tools that help them use a saw or whatever safely. The problem with that, and usually when I ask them, why is this guard, not here? They'll say, well, normally I only have to do 150 parts a day, but today, this whole week, we had to push to 200, and I just can't get everything done at the right speed when I have, the guard on. Well, I just want you to consider, you got to do 200 parts today, but you only make it through the first 100, and now you're missing a finger or a toe or any of your digits for that matter, or you're injured, you end up in the hospital. It's not just a cost to the employer, but it's also a cost to you in the pain and agony and time off work. Usually when you're on some kind of work-related injury, you don't get a full paycheck. But you know who it really hurts? It hurts your family members, the caretakers. My husband got injured at work, and I was actually off for a couple of months taking care of him. And so I lost pay too, which is bad. So always remember that if you're speeding up for whatever reason, it may not be worth it, especially if you're going to take off your guards. And then, of course, there's moving points, there's pinch points, there's rotating parts. So take a look. If you're a safety officer, you need to be paying attention to what your employees are wearing when they're working around rotated parts. So baggy clothing or something or heavy or baggy PPE may not be appropriate in some areas. So we're going to be looking for those kind of hazards. Now, electrical hazards, I look at this one and I just kind of laugh and I think how many times as a firefighter I went in and did an inspection and I saw this kind of mess. First of all, if there's a junction box, a place where a lot of electrical parts come together, they have to be closed. You can't have junction boxes open because there's injuries there. And anytime, that picture on the far right, anytime you're working with a big electrical box, you've always got the potential for an arc flash hazard. So we don't want to just be opening those boxes. And if I come do an inspection, they've got to be closed. If OSHA does an inspection, they're going to give you a fine if they're not closed. The picture at the bottom is what I call the daisy chain nightmare. Let's say that you've got some equipment, you need to supply it electricity, and so you go get an extension cord. Well, remember, OSHA does not allow us in the workplace to use an extension cord as a permanent supply of electricity. You've got to have a hardwired system that will supply that electricity. But what people will do is they will plug in the extension cord and it won't reach. If you take it through a pathway or a doorway, that's a pinch point, it could get damaged. And then a lot of times they'll use another extension cord to plug into it to make it reach all the way. And that's what we call daisy chaining things. And then when you overload both of those extension cords, you've got a potential for a problem. And a lot of times you don't even know it because the fire's in the electrical raceway. And when I come out, I have something called an axe. And that's how we find where the fire is. So there's damage and cost in that, not only to mention the potential for the hazard to you. Confined spaces is one of the situations where we have gone to as rescuers, and not only did the person that went in the confined space die, but the rescuers that were standing by. And in one incident here in the Dallas area, we had a guy go down in a confined space. Another guy goes in to rescue him. He died. A second guy goes in to rescue him. He dies. A third guy goes in to rescue him, and he dies. So you never want to make a problem bigger. That means you've got to be thoughtful in your approach as to how you're going to handle a confined space. So what do I mean by that? Most of us have done what we call JSAs, so job hazard analysis. A permit confined space is really more of a thoughtful job hazard analysis. Okay, what are the problems? What's the chemical we're working with? How are we going to get this person out? Do we have a lifeline tied to them? And you may need to harness them up to pull them out. Do you have rescue standing by? And in some situations, you may need that. And so a lot of things have to be thought about, including what is in there, and do you have a gas detector in which to see what is in there? And a lot of people want to stick it in and test it in one spot. You got to be testing it all over the space. But what you're looking for is not only oxygen levels. We don't want it to be less than 19.5 or above 23. And then we're looking for what are the flammables that are in there? Is there anything flammable? And if so, is it in the flammable range? We're going to be looking for maybe H2S if you're digging in the ground. Anything that is decomposing is going to be putting off H2S. And so you might want to test for that. And H2S can be very explosive. And then what chemicals do you work with? And do you have a gas meter that will test for those specific chemicals? So there's a lot that goes in. That is a very detailed course, and these are the kind of things that Lancaster can bring to you and your organization and what your employees are dealing with. When you look at chemical hazards in the workplace, a lot of people don't even really know what they have. So when we come in, we're teaching you how to know where to go for the answers. So if I were a safety officer in an organization, the first thing I would do is I would look at the top 3 chemicals that my employees work with. And I would try to figure out what the characteristics are, what's the routes of entry, what are the health effects, and how to obtain that information. And we're going to teach you how to do that inside the new SDSs. So let's look at a couple of hazards, definitions. And most of these you can read yourself. They're perfectly explanatory. But I want you to jump down to permissible exposure limits. The PELs or data from the 50s and 60s. So OSHA came about in the 70s, and the data that they had was from the 50s and 60s on chemicals and what chemicals would do. And OSHA's tried to update this several times, but big business lobbies Congress and keeps the law from changing. So OSHA, in order to try to figure out a workaround, they came up with the threshold limit values, and it really wasn't just OSHA, it was the American Congress of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. And they do the science every year, which means your SDS may need to be updated every year to see if there's any changes to the TLV. But the TLVs are safer. So a PEL from back in the 50s and 60s may be 1 parts per million exposure is tolerated. Well, the TLV may say, no, not even a half a part per million can be tolerated. And it may change how you manage that chemical. It may change how you use PPE around that chemical. And so knowing that the TLVs are where you want to go are important. So why did they come up with the new SDS versus the old Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS? One of the changes is SDSs have to have TLVs so that you have that information. Your old MSDSs were not only disorganized and we didn't know where to look for information, but it didn't always have a TLV. I remember as a firefighter responding to an incident, we asked the company for the SDSs, and I'm sitting there trying to find out if it's lighter than air, or heavier than air, or lighter than water, or heavier than water, so that we can figure out how to respond. And I'm flipping through all these pages trying to find it. Well, the good news is the SDSs are very organized. They have everything laid out, and you got to know where to go. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. There's other things like short-term exposure limits, time-weighted averages of being around a chemical, and then, of course, the latency period. Latency period, I just want to spend a minute on that. Latency periods from the time from which you were exposed to the time symptoms start, and they can be very, different for different people. But it's important for you to realize that employers have to maintain your medical records for 30 years after you leave employment. So let's say you had an exposure 10 years ago. You left the company after 5 years. You now are at another company and all of a sudden you're sick. Well, those records are back there. And that time from when you were exposed to the time where you now got sick is the latency period. But now you have rights because if you documented your exposure, you can go back and get the care that you need based on when that happened. So let's talk about routes of entry. You've got to understand how chemicals get into your body. And inhalation, it's the primary route. There's ingestion, there's absorption, and there's injection. So I want to give you an example. When Lancaster comes in and we take care of a client, we look at and analyze what's going on. So I had a client recently who milled stainless steel parts. When you mill stainless steel parts, you put it in this machine and it spins at a high level, and there's this product, this fluid that's being thrown up on the stainless steel to keep it cool. So it's encased. And so they spin the equipment, they get these stainless steel parts where they can actually be screwed in, and they have these milled parts that screw into big equipment. So not only did they mill the part, but after there's shavings that come off of that that look like little curlicues, and they're very fine and pointed. So now they have a puncture hazard over here, which is a bloodborne hazard. So keep that in mind. So they open the machine, they take the milled part out, and the employee holds it in his left hand. And with his right hand, he takes this air device and he blows off the milled part to get all that fluid off. Okay, now that air device that's in that employee's right hand, what's it rated at? Does it have the right kind of clamps? Is it approved by OSHA? All of those things Lancaster looks at when they come into your situation. And in this case, it was rated too high. So now when the employee is blowing off that part, he's actually injecting that chemical under his skin. Not to mention he's got all these band-aids on his hand because of all those little shavings have cut him. He's getting it into his skin. He's inhaling it because he's now making it airborne. Not only that, right next to where that operation was going on was the break room with the coffee pot and the table where they sat down and had their lunch. And it was all covered with a light coating of this chemical. So when an employee goes over to get a cup of coffee, they're now ingesting that chemical. Not to mention, they've got it all over their hands, so they're absorbing it. So analyzing these kind of situations is what we do here at Lancaster, and that is how we take care of you. We go in and we look at those SDSs. We know where to go for the answers, and we know how to guide you in how to protect your employees. So there are now pictograms, and I'm going to tell you as a firefighter, you're going to see DOT labels. They're how you send things by transportation. And when I saw these stick figures, I went ballistic. I was like, oh my God, 35 years of being a rescuer, our color-coded system has gone away. But I will tell you that I have now taught this many times in English. And I was out in West Texas for a pipeline company once, and they ended up with 20 people in the class that spoke Spanish, not English. Now, I speak a little Spanish. I don't think I'm fluent enough, but I speak a little Spanish, so I was able to maintain control of the classroom and get this class done. But what I found is that when I took an old label and I put it up there, the employees did not know what was in it. But when I put these new pictograms up here, everybody knew the answers, and I really believe that these work. So let's look at health hazards. If there's a pictogram that has an exploding chest like you see there, it's a health hazard to you. It's a carcinogen, a mutagen, a reproductive toxicity, a respiratory sensitizer, or it may target an organ. So when I see that, guess where I want to go inside of an SDS? I want to go to Section 2 because in Section 2, it details what the health hazards are. So my guidance may be, geez, folks, this affects your kidneys, it affects your liver, or it affects your heart, whatever the case may be. Let's see if you can substitute something else that will do the same job but won't have these health hazards. Well, now you know, because it's not only on shipping, but it's also on the labels. The flame, I want you to look at flame. Of course, it's flammable, pyrophoric, self-heating, all of those. But now, look down here in the bottom left corner to flame over circle. Flame over circle is an oxidizer, and flame is a flammable. And so what you need to do know is that you have a flame and a flame over circle. Those products cannot be parked next to one another. They have to be 25 feet apart or have a fire-rated wall between them. So knowing your pictograms will help you know how to store and handle chemicals too. Exclamation point, it's your irritants, your skin sensitizers. But one thing that I want you to notice there is narcotic effect. What is a narcotic effect? Well, you've heard of a lot of big time musicians who have died from opioid overdose, and we've got an opioid crisis now. And the opioid crisis is it's the drug use is secondary. So they have a heart attack, but the reason they have a heart attack is because of the narcotic effect. And the narcotic effect is that it suppresses your central nervous system. So basically, you take that drug and it makes you quit breathing. Well, there's chemicals out there that will do the same thing to you too. Boy, I would want to know it if that's happening to my employees. You see? And so you've got to have an eye. You got to know what you're looking for. Gas cylinders, when I see that, I just automatically think double whammy. Why is it a double whammy? Well, the chemical that's in there could be hazardous, but if that um, compressed gas container gets dropped or hit or struck by anything with any kind of force whatsoever, it becomes a missile. So it becomes a physical hazard for them. And then, of course, corrosion. This actually is a little picture of a test tube pouring onto metal, and you see the metal rotting away. And then over here on the hand, well, if it'll do that to metal, it'll also do that to your hand. So it's anything that's going to burn, corrosive. It's also a heavier product. And so when they ship it in smaller containers than, like gasoline's got like 8,000 gallons. Well, when you're shipping these kind of products, it's about half that is what they're going to ship. So you're going to see a smaller container bringing it to you. Exploding bomb, any kind of explosives, reactives, and things like that. Gosh, if you had that, you would want to know, right? And then, of course, at the bottom, there's a pictogram there for, I call it the EPA pictogram because what that is a dead tree and a fish belly up. And so what it tells you is what it is going to do to the body. I mean, to the earth. And so those kind of products we don't want going down the storms cellars or anything like that, the storm drains, because it ends up in our rivers and things like that. So we want to contain that. And then, of course, the skull and crossbones. Everybody knows the good old, oh my God, it's going to make you die if you see the skull and crossbones. So learning these 9 pictograms can stand in the gap for your employees. And we go over all of these in a lot of details in our classrooms. So remember when I said that the compressed gas containers can explode on you? Well, in the fire world, we call it a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. But lovingly, we call it the blast leveling everything very effectively. So I'm a reporter for Industrial Fire World magazine, and I went down to West Texas, and everybody knows about the West Texas explosion that happened here a few years ago. They had multiple BLEVEs go off down there. So there was a fire, it impinged on all these tanks, and all these tanks exploded. I mean, it was like they were having nuclear war there. There was a mushroom cloud, it was everything. It not only hit the railroad and the railroad berm and pushed all those rocks into the air, but it went down and under. It tore up all the water systems of that city. So we had water everywhere, but no water we could put on the fire. We lost about 15, I think it was 15 emergency rescuers at that. So people, when you look at any kind of compressed gas, even the compressed gas that most of you have in your backyard, it's called propane. Just know propane, when it's heated, it expands 267 times its size when it goes from a volume to, when it goes from a liquid to a mist or a gas. and it's putting pressure on that container. So we want to be very careful with these kind of things. This is why OSHA says you have to have those devices chained to the wall, and you have to have equipment to help you move them and things like that. But these are the kind of things we're going to cover. Now, the transportation pictograms, they're really, if you're dealing with DOT, you're packaging up stuff and you're shipping it, you need to know these. You just need to know them. And the orange ones at the bottom, I know they're explosives. The compressed gas, it's usually going to be green, but they're also green, white, or silver. I think you can see more than one color. Your organic peroxides. So I want you to look at the yellow one called oxidizing and the red one. Okay, so red next to yellow, kill a fella. You never park those together. Those are the ones that you've got to keep 25 feet apart, or you have to have a fire-rated wall for them too. So let's move on. And Crystal, let's do the Insta Safety Poll.
All right, thanks, Sherry. So we're going to go ahead and test your knowledge and see how well you've been listening so far. So the first question is a true or false question. It's ingestion is the primary route of entry for hazardous chemical. So we'll go ahead and give you a minute or a second or two to put your answers in. All right, so the answer is false. It was inhalation is the primary route of entry.
All right, let's go back to the safety data sheets. So remember I told you safety data sheets are now organized in a much more thoughtful way. And so as an employer, if you don't have a lot of background in safety, I want to bring your attention to two of these categories. The first one is hazard identification. So inside hazard identification, it will tell you what organs it affects. Sometimes you'll see the PALs and the TLVs there. Usually I see them in other areas, but yes, it will tell you what organs and what could happen to those employees. If you look at 4 and you got a first aid issue, there you go. That's how you handle it. 5, if you got a small fire, that's how you handle it. If you have an accidental release, it's going to tell you how to handle it. If you're going to have to store it or handle it, boom, tells you how to handle it. Guess what it says in there for flammables? Don't park next to oxidizers. Guess what it says for oxidizers? The reverse says the very same thing. So it tells you all this information. But if you look at OSHA's hierarchy of controls, how does OSHA want you to control these hazards? Well, they start with if you can eliminate it or substitute something else, go ahead and do that. But if you can't, the primary way that they want you to control any kind of hazard is to engineer it out. Okay, it's called an engineered control. What do I mean by that? Well, if it's a chemical, you may need a ventilation system that takes it out of the room. If it's noise, you may need a sound barrier. Who knows? So you've got to engineer. In one of my companies that makes these, they make conveyor belts that our luggage goes on, and they have an engineered control. So they have this metal thing that goes across it when they are testing the rollers, because they had an employee hurt themselves by touching it when they shouldn't have been doing it. So there's an engineered control, and then if that doesn't work, then you, the employer, now has to come up with some kind of administrative rule. So what do I mean by that? You may have a rule that says, do not touch that conveyor roller when it's moving. And you will train your employees as to why this is important and why not touch that thing, because they'll say, but I need to know if it's smooth or whatever. With regard to chemicals, it may say that you will not touch that chemical without wearing PPE. The next one is PPE. So the next control is personal protective equipment, and which personal protective equipment that you're going to wear. So if we take just H2S is obviously hazardous. The engineering control is that you might need to ventilate it out. The administrative rule could be some kind of policy and training on how to handle Administrative rule could be some kind of policy and training on how to handle H2S, like never smoke around this or whatever it may be. And then what is your training program for that? And then the PPE may be that they have to wear a self-contained breathing apparatus, not just a respirator. And you go, well, why do they have to wear a self-contained breathing? Well, the problem with H2S is you smell it and it stinks, and you think, ooh, that's nasty. But then it wears out the nerves in your nasal cavity, and all of a sudden, you don't smell it anymore. But guess what? It's still there. But your nose doesn't know it. And now, when you get to 100 parts per million, boom, busted, you're dead. And you didn't even know because you didn't take a time to read that SDS and know those exposure controls are there. The physical and chemical properties are there, stability and reactivity, the toxicological data. That I'm going to want to take a picture of with my phone before I transport them to the hospital, because that's really going to be valuable to the physician who's doing the blood work and see what levels they are. So do you see how that works? Now, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are not mandatory for OSHA, but 12 is for EPA. 13 is EPA, and 14 is with the Department of Transportation. So if you're gonna be packaging something up and you're gonna be sending it off, and you go, which placard should I put on this? Boom, go to section 14, and you'll see that. Other regulatory information, and then other information. Do you see how much value is in your SDSs? And this is one thing I like to really drill home with students in the classroom, to make sure that they know where to go and at least know 2 and 8, right? 2 is the hazard and 8 is how to control that hazard. So we move on to bloodborne pathogens. It's any kind of organism that, when it's present in the human blood, it can cause disease. Now, there are 3 primary pathogens: your hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and of course, human immunodeficiency virus, which leads to HIV. So we cover these in classes too. There's over 200 biological agents. I mean, there's all kinds of bacteria, virus, fungi, anything that could cause illness in you. So let's say you have a brick building and your employees come into that brick building every day, and there's a place where water stands right as they're walking into the building. And now you see a little mold growing right in there. That's a biological hazard to your employees and to your facility. So how do you get rid of that mold? I know how to get rid of it. Once it's dry, a lot of people think, oh, I'll just go pour some bleach on it. Well, a mold is a living organism. It will migrate to get away from that bleach, to save itself. You may kill some of it, but you won't kill all of it. So in the classroom, we teach a hypochlorite solution: 1 part bleach, 9 parts water, spray it on there. Moles and things like that love water. It's sucked in by the water, boom, the bleach kills it. These are the kind of things that we help you do in the classroom. Now, there's other things out there that are hazardous to your employees, biological hazards. We talk about malaria, that's your mosquitoes, babesiosis, your ticks, Lyme disease, your ticks. Here in Dallas, not too long ago, we had an Ebola scare. Well, I mean, you've got to know where to go for the answers in that. I not only use one of resources as OSHA, but I also use the Center for Disease Control when we're doing research for you to help you play safer. Airborne pathogens. I mean, there has been flu all over the media here recently. In Dallas, I think we're up to 100 people in this North Texas area that has died from the flu. So when people have coughs and sneezes or any kind of medical procedures, there could be just from inhaling the air droplets. When you sneeze, there was a report once, I think it said you sneeze at 300 miles an hour. It goes about 8 to 12 feet, so it doesn't go all over the place, but it does do that. Tuberculosis, meningitis, measles, influenza, all of those are going to be inside there. So if you have a lot of people that have the flu and a lot of people don't want to take off work, you may need a control. What would be the control? Well, you might have a rule that says if you have fever or an active cough or anything like that, you're not to come to work. So just consider that those are things that you have some action that you need to take to keep your people safe. Biosolids. I teach a lot for the people that clean the water here in the Texas area, and I do their HAZWOPER training. And so they have a lot of biohazards, especially when things get warm and dry and there's a lot of dust flying around. There's bacteria, viruses. So depending on if it's above the rated PAL or above the rated TLV, they may have to go into respirators or they may be able to wear a dust mask. I just don't know. It depends on the situation. You have to bring in an industrial hygienist to figure all that out, but there are people that can help you figure that out. But good hygiene is a must. People don't wash their hands enough. You just washing your hands. Another thing is washing your gloves. So if you got a cough and or you've got bronchitis or and you're coughing into your hand or into your glove, just consider that on a regular basis, wash your hands. Um, we also recommend that if you cough or sneeze into your shoulder and not your hand, and that will also help you too. Other biologicals. Wow, look at that. I mean, we just have rattlesnakes in Texas. It just is what it is. These were some workers that were out working on a pipeline and they got a winter. It wasn't a chicken dinner, it was a rattlesnake dinner, but but yeah, I mean, you're going to have to call in all kinds of people to help you with those cottonmouths, ants, mosquitoes, animal bites from poison plants. Also, they had a gator. That was a big one. So, Crystal, how about another Insta safety poll?
All right, so last Insta safety poll. Again, we're going to test your knowledge here. So the question is, there are 12, it's a true or false, there are 12 sections that are required to be included on an SDS. So again, we'll give you another second or two to put your answers in. And the answer is false. There are actually 16 sections.
All right. So, we're back to physical hazards. Physical health hazards could include noise, temperature extremes, radiation, impact forces, vibrations, um, noise. As a firefighter for 35 years, I heard a lot of sirens. I have a situation today, it's called tinnitus, and it's ringing in my ears. It's from having loud noises in my ears. Now, I can hear, but it is the beginning of hearing loss, and a lot of firefighters suffer from this. And it's because we were exposed to high noises. Now, um, if you have, and you can download a sound meter onto your phone. It's one of my OSHA apps is a sound meter, and I can just do quick tests. Now you want an industrial hygienist testing this because if your operations are very loud, let's say above 84 or 85 decibels, you're going to need to begin a program where you're starting to check your employees' hearing and do autonomic testing. And you may need PPE. And depending on how loud the noise is, you may need, you can just use the little earbuds, they're foam, and they just kind of roll them up, put them in, let them expand, earplugs, or you may need the muffs, depending on that. But remember what OSHA's primary control is that they want you to use? It's an engineering control. So they may have you, instead of using PPE, because it's our last line of defense, they may want you to put a sound barrier up or encase something that operates really loud so that your employees are not exposed to that. So always keep in mind that engineering controls is the primary way that OSHA wants us to control. Temperature extremes, hot and cold. In Texas, we have a lot of high heat and we have a lot of humidity. When the humidity is up, and I also recommend that you have a weather app on your phone, especially if you have crews that are outside. You've got to be able to pull up and see if there's fast moving storms, get your people to safety, what the temperatures are, and what the humidity is for the day. So as the humidity goes up in high heat, there's an OSHA app for you, and that app will tell you to give your employees more frequent breaks or to rotate them through those hot jobs. Ionizing or non-ionizing radiation, and then of course impact forces, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. So your noise or your unwanted sound, any kind of noise from industrial processes. So anytime you have that, you could have hearing loss from long term. Now, the people in West Texas, when they had the explosion, there were several of them that could not hear or see for days because it was a quick, loud shock to their hearing system. However, their hearing did come back, but it could make a change to their hearing later in life or their ability to see in life. So just know that if it's really loud, it could impact you immediately. But if it's over, remember those time-weighted averages? If it's over a period of time, it could affect you too. So those are things that we look at when we come out there. Temperature extremes, the heat and the cold. Thank you for using a picture of a firefighter. Unfortunately, that is not me. Uh, he's a lot better than looking than I am. But yeah, we suffer a lot of high heat. So not only are we getting close to the fire, but we have on heavy bunker gear. So we have an administrative rule, and the administrative rule is that we're usually in a fire for about 15 minutes and they rotate us out. And then I'm out for, I'm sorry, we're in there for 30 minutes and then they rotate us out. And we have to be out for at least 15. And we have to get checked by a paramedic before we can go back in. Because depending on who you are, I mean, if you've got cramps going on in your body and it's like something's crawling underneath your skin, paramedics aren't going to let you go in. They're going to make you drink some more Gatorade or Powerade or whatever it is they have and get you stable before they let you go back in there. So you got to watch your employees when the temperature is high. And when the temperature is cold, it's the same thing. Teach your employees to layer up so that they can layer down as necessary. And then a lot of people fail to cover their head. And head is where we lose a lot of heat, especially with children because their head is a bigger part of their body. But keep that in mind. And then there's one rule that as an emergency cardiac care educator, I just want to share it with you. We have a rule that if you're dead, you're not you're not dead until you're warm and dead. So anytime somebody suffers cardiac arrest from cold, we've got a really, really, really good chance of saving them. So CPR is going to be primary in that kind of situation. All right, we've talked about the temperature extremes, but where do you find it? You know, any of your foundries, glass and brick firing and ceramic plants, bakeries. So even your bakers are exposed to high heats. Laundries, canneries, chemical plants, smelters, steam tunnels, all kinds of places where we can find that. And then, of course, impact forces and vibrations. Any kind of impact tool, any kind of vibrating tool can jar the body and can cause problems for you. What's most important is that you report any exposure, especially a long-term exposure to this, and try to find out what is the chronic hazard. So you have acute things that happen. And what I mean by acute, what's the sudden impact on the body? But then there's chronic exposure to something, and you could have a chronic health issue What's that long chronic health issue that may come about a few years down the road? You need to know those kind of things. So now we come to workplace violence. Here's the thing. It's shameful that we are to the point that we are. And this is not only prevalent in our schools, it's in our colleges, but we're starting to see this a lot in the workplace too. As a result, a lot of business has had to consider another level of safety where they have controlled access to their facility. So you can't get into the door unless you get by the reception who's checked you in. Sometimes when I check in at some plants, I'm giving them my ID. They want to know who I am. And in one plant, I have to give them my ID a week in advance because they're doing a background check on me. We want to make sure that we're not just letting anybody in. Now, what's another clue? Another clue is that you have an employee that's showing up with bruises on their body. There probably could be being abused at home. And one of the times that workplace violence is prevalent is when one mate will show up at the workplace and actually kill the other mate. So you need to be sensitive to those kind of things. And of course, anytime an employee is in stress or they're in fear of someone, you need to consider that. Threats, verbal abuse, physical assaults, homicides, it's happening everywhere. And I hate that the love has gone out of a lot of people's lives. But you've got to show the love for your employees by keeping them safe, controlling access to your facilities. So keep that in mind for moving forward. And then, of course, workplace violence. If an employee, a police officer told me this once when I was a young paramedic. He said, if somebody will speak it, he said they'll do it. Now, there's actual science, there's advanced neuroscience out that says as you speak, you create neural pathways in your brain. You actually give your brain a prime command. So if you ingest, you say, I'm going to kill that guy, I'm going to kill you, you know? And you're just saying it in jest. Consider that you're actually giving your brain a prime command, and you want to be cautious about the words that you use and how you approach people and things out there in the workplace because it's becoming a serious problem. And you know what I hate? I hate that there's a couple of kids that have now gone to jail because they posted something on Facebook and they were making jest about the shootings that are going on in the schools. But guess what they said? I'm going to go shoot up my school. And now they're in jail at the age of 12, 13, 14. It's crazy what's going on. So what are some of the prevention strategies? You're going to tighten your physical security. Administrative, who are you going to let have access to all your records? Who are you going to allow to get into your computer system? I have a server here. I don't want just anybody to have access to my server. And so you never know. You need to be thoughtful in how you approach that. And then behavioral. You need to have a workplace violence program that is a zero tolerance. Another thing that I would recommend that you have is leadership training. We do leadership training here, and we talk to people about their thoughts and how they approach things. But most important, what are team dynamics in your organization? Are there clear roles? Is there clear communication? But most importantly, is there mutual respect for everybody? I want you to think about that person that you met the other day and you didn't really like them. There was something about them in your gut that said, I don't like them. And I want to challenge you that that person, first of all, you made it up. It's just going off a gut. But is it respectful to think of people that way? And as a leader, you have to challenge yourself on your own thoughts. There's some places that say that we have nearly 60,000 conversations with ourselves every day. And if you just said, no, I don't, well, guess what? You just had one of them just now. So I want to challenge you that we're having the conversations. Most people don't control them. and you will hear them in the background of their lives. They will say things. And when they say things, leaders step up and they have difficult conversations with people. And I'm one of those leaders. Now, the key to having a difficult conversation with an employee is to stay neutral and to stay calm and to make requests. I don't make demands, I make requests. And when I request something, they're either going to agree with you or they're not. And if they're not, it's an easy decision for me. But if they agree to move forward, I may have to give them reminders, but I'm not afraid to have a difficult conversation. And that is what's missing in our workplace today. So recognizing health hazards. What are the materials you're using? What are you adding in the process? What are you producing? What are the byproducts? What could be released? What's your cycle of operation? These are all things that those of us that work at Lancaster are trained to help you recognize and learn how to control. What's your cleanup procedures? What's the shape, color, markings of containers? We've covered some of that today that's going to help you recognize them. But if you need help, don't hesitate to call, because not only do we do inspections for you, but we also come out and we do training that addresses the issues where you need help. Evaluating hazards a lot of time is going to happen with your job hazard analysis, or some people call it the job safety analysis. And basically, you know what it is? It's a form that just asks a lot of thoughtful questions. What are we doing here? What's it going to do? How's it going to hurt people? And it makes you think about that. And if you're not using JHAs, I would so encourage you to get them out and start using them. I have some clients that use them every single day. And then I have some clients that use them every week. Some clients use it only on certain jobs. But whatever, start using them, get used to them, and they will help walk you through what you need to think about with that job. They're just a bunch of important questions. And what's important for you to know is that questions trigger critical thinking skills in your employees. So don't just think that since you're the leader, it's up to you. It's actually up to the team, good team dynamics. You're going to include everybody. Ask those people that are down there in the the ditches that are doing the work. Ask them the questions, because they have some answers that you might not have simply because their perspective is different. And then controlling hazards, are we going to eliminate? We're going to engineer control it, administrative, or personal protective equipment. I think we beat that one to death, but that one's an important one to OSHA, so you got to have it. Prevention is key. Identify the problems that you have in your workplace. And if you're not a safety person with a lot of experience, invite Lancaster to come in and help you with that, because that is our job. Educate and train your employees, and Lancaster can help you with that too. And then succeed, preventing accidents, avoiding OSHA fines. And it's not unusual for me to be called in at the very last minute to do a quick inspection to help you get everything cleaned up, so that before OSHA shows, you are good to go. So if you have an accident and you know OSHA's coming, you call us. We'll come help you with that. So here's some OSHA resources. OSHA.gov. There's all kinds of information. So your job is to have a toolbox talk or a tailgate talk with your employees, and you need an idea. Go in there to those e-tools. You can print off handouts. You can come up with anything. If you had somebody that injured their hand yesterday, you can go find out a handout there about that too. So little quick cards. I call it bathroom reading. I like to give it out to people. I like to put it in the bathroom because people will read in the bathroom. And so put it there, tape it on the inside the door, make things available, not just in the locker room, not just in the lunchroom, but make it available to your employees. All right, I think it is time that I hand this back over to Crystal. Thank you all so much for your time and your attention.
Yes, and Sherry, we want to thank you again for joining us today. And we thank everybody that was able to log in and listen. We hope that you got a lot of information out of that. If you do have any further questions about anything that was discussed today, please feel free to call us here at Lancaster Safety. Our phone number is 888-403-6026. It's also there on the slide, and we will be happy to help you. Also, if you can follow us on social media for more news updates and safety information, or provide us with feedback on either Yelp, Google, or Facebook. We truly appreciate your time and hope you will take advantage of our monthly safety and health webinars. Everyone is invited and they're always free. So just visit our website or click the link on your screen for more information. Again, thank you so much for attending today, and we hope that you have a safe and healthy day.